May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. I am delighted to be here with you today, to be here as ILIF's president, to be here as a member of the faith community, to share and give witness on this day on who God is and how God moves in this world. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be reconnected with your pastor, although she made me a bit nervous. If you consider her a great preacher, I say I had something to do with that. On the other hand, if you see her kind of this way, remember she graduated from Union and not Chicago Theological Seminary. I want to thank my colleague, Reverend Dr. Eric Smith, for the introduction. One never knows what one will say about someone, but I very much appreciate how he spoke about my life and our relationship, his observations of me. We have a mutual friend who is also in Chicago, and I think it was probably Dr. Smith, when I was interviewing, who told our mutual friend, I like this guy. So I'm glad that you like this guy. And I hope that we will have many years together to work and build at the ILIF School of Theology. And I'm also pleased that you have one on staff who is a student at ILIF who will become an alum of ILIF, who will continue to serve and carry forth the good work that we do at ILIF. So thank you for your prayers this morning. I also want to express my gratitude. Given my years of service at 2 United Church of Christ seminaries, it's nice to be within this gathering of the faithful. I began my teaching career at Lancaster Theological Seminary in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I left Lancaster to join the faculty at Chicago Theological Seminary. Those of you who are lifelong members of the United Church of Christ and know that history, you will appreciate that when I was at Lancaster, which comes out of the E&R tradition, I thought that's what it meant to be UCC. And then I went to Chicago and learned about the Congregationalist. And boy, was I surprised. But I did very much appreciate my time within that household of faith. I'm also grateful that at this particular moment in American history, First Plymouth has chosen to give attention to African American history and heritage. This makes you quite special, and I dare say even courageous. There are many ways of interpreting African American history. One starting point is African pre-colonial history. Another starting point is American enslavement. One point says there was a rich history before European colonization. Another says enslavement saved Africans by introducing them to Christianity. This last point, from time to time, has taken on a twist to say that Black suffering has or will save the soul of America as God's plan. Today, I hope we will pivot from that position to see Africans acting with agency throughout salvation history, and not as sacrificial lambs to save the nation. And so we want to focus our attention on Jeremiah, the 38th chapter, verses 7 through 13, and reflect on African American history is part of God's salvation history. African American history has continuously been the story of struggle through the worst of times, seeking to experience better days. While it has been said it is always darkest before the dawn, we have often asked, why is the night so long? And although we may have experienced beams of heaven that shine light here and there on a timeline of history, we are still left asking the question, if God is so good, and folks like to say all the time, why does God allow evil and suffering to continue? This was certainly the question that plagued the prophet Jeremiah, set apart and appointed in his mother's womb to be a prophet. Jeremiah was sent forth to proclaim, "Thus says the Lord." However, he thought living a faithful life would be full of blessing and admiration. I mean, what pastor doesn't believe that they're going to be loved, honored, treasured, cherished? So wasn't he surprised when his messages were full of doom and gloom, and he became a weeping prophet because of the sins of the people? In our text, because he wasn't proclaiming triumph over the enemy of Judah, he was declared a traitor and incarcerated. The people wanted to hear a message about protecting their borders. They wanted to hear a prosperity gospel to make Judah great again. Although they were warned not to be deceived, they chose deception and acted against the prophet despite the warnings. Now, he wasn't just thrown into prison. He was thrown into isolation, solitary confinement, a detention cell, into a broken cistern full of mud and likely full of disease. Have you ever stepped into deep mud? Mud so thick and deep that it forms a suction around you? Mud so deep that try as you may, there is no getting out on your own. Being a fisherman, I've experienced that kind of mud, where I actually had to step out of my boots in order to get out of the mud, and then pull the boot out later. Some of us today are feeling we are sinking deeper and deeper into the mud and the mire. And there is deep despair because we're feeling like there is no deliverance. There was a time in American history when reading and writing were outlawed as a tactic for maintaining slavery for life. And yet today, reading and writing are once again being outlawed as we experience the banning of books and making racial, ethnic, queer, and gender studies illegal. We are sinking in the mud of a broken cistern, and we're calling it our future. But it is broken. It is not life-giving. Jeremiah was prophesying God's salvation, but the people did not accept his prophecies as being God's words. So instead of Jeremiah leading the people, he became a victim of the people. Because the people were against Jeremiah, God called someone from outside to save Jeremiah and the people. The 38th chapter of this book of Jeremiah introduces Ebed-Melek, the Cushite, the Ethiopian. It's important to notice that the biblical record periodically introduces an Ethiopian as a part of God's salvation history. In many instances, they are not passive actors. Rather, they are active agents of God. This Ethiopian's name could have been his office, or it could have been his given name, servant of the king. There is often the language debate on that. Was it his name or his role? But we could also translate his name, Ebed-Melek, pious worshiper of God as king. In his approach to King Zedekiah, Ebed-Melek spoke as a faithful believer, as one who recognized Jeremiah as a prophet of the one true God, and that he was being treated unjustly. Tracing African-American history back to Africa through the biblical record, it is clear in the words of Dr. James Evans we have always been believers. Ebed-Melek was a trusted member of the royal household who was clearly identified as a Black African. And as believers in the one true God, Africans have always participated in and been recipients of God's salvation. Ebed-Melek made intercession on behalf of Jeremiah. Yet God did not require that Ebed-Melek's life needed to be sacrificed for Jeremiah to live. He was not required to become a martyr. Yet his participation in delivering Jeremiah from that cistern did require courage. The last point I want to make about this story. The salvific work of God, in which an African was an active agent, required a collaborative communal effort. I said earlier that Jeremiah was stuck in the mud, which formed a suction around his body. Pulling Jeremiah out of the broken cistern required care and communal cooperation. Again, recognizing that he was stuck in the mud, could not lift himself out, recognizing that trying to pull him with raw rope would probably have bruised him in ways that would have been very problematic. So Ebed-Melek took rags, other clothes, and wrapped it around the rope that gave him cushion and protection, padding that when he was being pulled by this community out of this situation, he could be delivered safely. In other words, if we are going to get out of the mess that we are in currently, we will have to pull together. African American history is replete with stories of survival and deliverance that were only made possible by faith and pledging to work together. By faith, we survived the forced march from interior to the continental coast. By faith, we survived the Middle Passage. By faith, we maintained our family values despite auction block. By faith, we fought for an end to slavery and for our freedom. By faith, we maintained our sanity within a system determined to destroy our minds and break our hearts. By faith, we held on to life in the face of death. By faith, our eyes have seen, our ears have heard, and our hands have felt the goodness of God. Let us learn from this story of the faith of Ebed-Melek that it is a testimony that speaks the history of a people, often misinterpreted, often misunderstood, but always in God's hands. Amen.